My two kids, Sam and Robbie, are twins. They're 6 years old. A year ago, we were living at our old house, but something happened that led to us moving. It's a long, awful story. I lived in my old house for 4 years. My wife Carol and I got married while I was living there, and we had our kids there too. The neighborhood was slowly changing, and not for the better, but even still, we originally planned on staying in that house for the foreseeable future, until this happened. We were a corner house, and the house behind us on the intersecting road was covered by a bunch of tall trees and bushes, so we hardly ever saw those neighbors. Our neighbor on the right, however, his name was Steve. He had just moved there less than a year ago at the time. I had only ever spoken with him a couple of times. Both times I could hardly understand what he said because of his heavy accent, and he just overall didn't seem like the friendliest guy. 2 of his windows overlooked our backyard. There wasn't much privacy. But whatever rooms the 2 windows were that overlooked the backyard, I had never seen the lights on in either of them, so I always assumed it was an unused guest room or something of that nature. One day in the summertime, Sam and Robbie were playing in the backyard in their blow-up pool and with their water guns while I was outside doing yard work. There came a certain point where I was walking towards the detached garage, and then I saw Steve next door at his window for a second. Only half a second after noticing him did he turn and walk away from the window. It was slightly odd for sure, but I left it alone. Later that day, as the sun was going down, the kids went back outside to play again. It was a very hot day, so they went back in their blow-up pool while Carol and I were in the kitchen as she was making dinner. Then the kids' laughter went quiet for a while, and suddenly Robbie came inside and said there was a flashing light from the neighbor's window. I had to follow him to the backyard to ask him to show me what he was talking about. He pointed to one of Steve's upstairs windows that overlooked the backyard, and he said there was a white light that kept coming from that window. I right away assumed the worst, and asked the twins if it looked like a camera flash. They both said yes. I told them it's time to dry off and come inside. So I helped them dry themselves, and then brought them in, where I went to tell Carol about this. She right away assumed the worst just like me. She said I should go next door and knock on Steve's door. So I did. But when I did, he never answered the door. His car was even in the driveway, so he had to be home. After a few attempts at knocking and ringing the bell, I gave up and went back to my house. I told Carol he wasn't opening up, which made what the kids said seem even more credible. While we couldn't prove that the white light the kids were seeing was a camera flash, it sure did sound like it, and it was concerning to hear. Some time passed, maybe even weeks, before one night when Carol and I were in the bedroom, we heard our side gate being quietly opened and closed outside. Carol wanted me to go check outside, so I stepped out into the backyard and looked around. I had on all the lights as I searched. I found nothing and nobody, but I noticed the lights in Steve's backyard were on. I went over to look over the fence into his yard, and I nearly jumped out of my skin when he came up to the fence from the other side and asked if I needed something. I asked him if he'd seen or heard anyone sneaking through our yard. He said no. I took this time to also ask him bluntly if he had by chance been watching my kids, as they thought someone was at his window taking pictures of them playing in the pool. His reaction to this was a bit suspicious. He acted overly offended to my asking this, almost yelling at me for such an accusation. Again, without proof, I couldn't, nor did I want to, start issues with a neighbor. I apologized and went back inside. Carol was not happy about this, saying he's full of shit. The next incident didn't happen until another few weeks later. This time it was in the middle of the night when we were asleep. I woke up to Carol shaking me in a panic. I looked around the room confused at first, but then when I heard the kids screaming from their room, I exploded from the bed and ran downstairs to the kids' room. Robbie was awake and crying, and I found out a few seconds later that his crying and screaming had awoken Sammy, who was crying and screaming in reaction to him. Robbie said there was someone outside the window a second ago, and there was a camera flash from the window. I got goosebumps, but I also felt my blood begin to boil. All I could say was, what did he look like? He said he didn't see. I brought the kids up to our room to sleep in the bed with us. With the lights off, I peeked out our bedroom window to look across at Steve's unlit house next door. I looked at each window of his house, and I found him. He, just like me, was peeking out one of the upstairs windows, in that same room that overlooks the backyard. I stormed outside next door and rang his doorbell like 15 times. He never opened his door. I did call the police just to make a report on Steve. That way, if any future reports were made about him from other people, maybe the police department would look into him. I never saw him again, Sometimes I'd sit out front waiting to see him outside, but he'd clearly avoid coming outside when I'd be out there. Because of this, we ended up moving within a month to a new house in a different but nearby town, which has proven to be a better place to raise the kids anyway. About 3 months ago, I moved into an apartment with 2 other women so I could attend college. There's a list of things that make the building we live in not that great. For example, most apartment rooms face the corridor, where people from the same floor as you will constantly walk left and right to get in or out of the building. So if you keep your windows open, anyone pacing outside can see into your room. But considering I spend most of my time at college, and the girls I live with and most of the neighbors are really nice, the things on that list don't really bother me that much. A few nights ago, while getting ready to go to bed, I could hear music playing from somewhere, mostly pop songs from the 2000s. Since we live in a student-friendly city full of frat houses and the likes, I thought nothing of it. There were probably a bunch of parties going on and the sound was coming from one of them, or maybe it was just some drunk friends listening to it on the street. I got into bed and let a random video play on my phone so I could fall asleep, as I often do. But as I was starting to doze off, I started to hear drilling noises. At first, I thought I was just sleepy and hearing things, or maybe it was coming from my phone, but I paused the video and listened closely. There was definitely someone using a drill somewhere nearby. I got up and walked around the apartment feeling confused. It was around 11 p.m., so there was no way that someone could be working still. The sound was louder at my bedroom window, so I opened it to check, and quickly realized that it was coming from the neighboring apartment, the one that's closest to my window. At that moment, I realized that music was also coming from there. No one lives in that specific apartment, so my confusion only grew. But then I figured maybe someone had planned to rent it, talked it over with the landlord, and he ordered for something in it to be fixed. Still, the fact that they were doing it so late into a Thursday felt really strange. I went back to trying to sleep, but they wouldn't stop making noise. I was texting a friend and eventually started complaining about it, sending him audios and even a video directed at the window that all the noise was coming from. He said I should call the police because there was no way it was legal for someone to be doing this, especially in a building full of apartments. I decided against it since I just wanted to get some rest, and it was already past midnight by then. I forced myself to sleep through the drilling sounds, but a little past 1 in the morning, I woke up again, this time to hammering. Feeling stressed, but not enough to take action just yet, I tried to sleep once more, only to wake up again. This time, I didn't even check what time it was. I was totally fed up. So I just put on a robe and made my way to confront whoever it was. The window to the apartment was open, so I decided to talk to those people from there. The window was located above the stairs though, so I would have to go down a few steps to get into view, and I'd look even shorter being seen from there. But that was the last thing on my mind. As soon as I got to the window, I felt most of the courage leave me. In that room, there were 4 men, who all seemed to be around their 30s or 40s, and they all stopped whatever they were doing to look at me. Now, only the song coming from the radio could be heard, and somehow it felt chilling to have all those other noises stop so abruptly, because even though that's everything I wanted just seconds earlier, I definitely didn't want to be the one thing these 4 men were focused on. Another thing that bothered me, but I didn't think about until the next day, was those men's peculiar choice of music. It just felt creepy to realize that middle-aged men were listening to stuff that teenagers or even preteens would be listening to. Anyway, none of them looked shocked to see me. They just had puzzled "what's that" looks. Remembering why I was there in the first place, I said, "Excuse me, it's pretty late and most people here have work early in the morning. If it's not too much to ask, can you guys do this some other time?" Now, mind you, I'm a pretty short and puny 19-year-old who didn't even think to put on something other than a robe. So when 2 of those 40-something-year-old men came to the window and towered over me, looking up and down at my body almost like predators, I froze up and felt the hairs in the back of my neck stand up. They were both sweaty and had their mouths agape, and one of them had a hammer that looked quite heavy in his hand. They started smiling in a sick, twisted way, and I felt a sudden urge to throw up. Extremely unsettled, I started slowly making my way back to my apartment, not taking my eyes off the men, feeling like they might try to grab me when I got to the last step of the stairs and close enough to the window. As soon as I was out of their view, I dashed to my front door, got inside, and locked it. One of the girls who lives with me was out of town that night, and I presumed the other one was asleep, since she hadn't seen my text on our group chat asking them if anyone had moved into that apartment. I got back into my room and didn't hear any tools again. In reality, even the radio seemed to have been turned off. I wasn't really sure how to feel about that because now I wasn't angry, just disgusted and creeped out. I know I should have called the cops by then, but I was just too stressed to deal with that any longer. Checking the time, it was about 2:15 now. I got into bed again, tricking myself into thinking I wasn't scared, just craving some sleep. Eventually, I passed out. I woke up in the middle of the night again. This time it was around 3:30, and I could hear no sounds coming from the apartment. Everything was quiet, and that quickly started to bother me. It was too quiet. I had to have heard or felt something in order to wake up. The silence was making me uneasy, and I had a feeling that someone might have been on the other side of my closed window. I tried not to think about it, but I couldn't get a peaceful sleep after that. The next morning, as I was going out, I went past the same window and noticed that it was closed. It was as if this previous night had never even happened. But I asked the girl who was home with me if she heard anything. She said she had woken up several times during the night, but couldn't get up and do something about it due to sleep paralysis. Either way, that confirmed I wasn't delusional. Those people really were there. But then, how did they have the keys to the building and that apartment? Why did it seem like they didn't want to be seen during the day? What were they thinking of doing to me or maybe any passerby? It's been a week now, and thankfully I haven't seen those men again. Still, I have no idea who they were or what they were doing, and I'm honestly scared to even think about the possibility that they might come back, or still be lurking around somewhere. I live in a pretty basic suburban town on Long Island, New York. My girlfriend Sarah and I recently started renting a small house perfect for 2 to 4. We have a decent-sized backyard, and our house is on a very quiet street. One side of our house has a water drainage basin, as the county calls it, which is just a bunch of trees surrounding a sump. On the other side is our neighbor Kyle, who lives with his wife. They're a bit older in their 60s and quiet. Then directly across the street is a little patch of woods that's in front of another water drainage basin. So for people who like privacy out front, our house is perfect. But then there's the backyard. Kyle's house is blocked off by some bushes that the landlord planted years ago. So besides the house directly behind us over the fence, there's no other houses that could see into the yard. However, that one house looking into our backyard was all that it's taken to genuinely make Sarah and I uncomfortable. As I'm writing this, it's currently the fall, so we've been doing fall cleanup the past few weeks in the front and backyard. I started noticing anytime we were out there were these 2 people standing at the upstairs window of the house behind us. It was a middle-aged man and woman. When I'd look up to that window, they'd keep looking and watching me. It got really uncomfortable to the point we'd pretend not to notice it, but we could only stomach doing this for so long. The leaves kept falling day by day, and the fall cleaning would need to continue. Sarah wouldn't want to be in the yard anymore because she was getting so creeped out at those 2 people who would watch us out the window without fail. So one foggy day while raking, I looked up at the window and once again, the 2 were standing at the big rectangular window. I decided to wave at them, see if they'd wave back. After a few seconds of smiling and waving, they didn't move. No reaction. But I could feel their stares and I could see their eyeballs looking at me. I turned away from the window and tried to continue raking, but after sneaking a peek back at the window a couple minutes later and seeing them still there, I felt too awkward and weird being out there. I went inside. Sarah said we should go over and introduce ourselves. At first, I was hesitant of that, but I was persuaded to walk around the block with her to that house and ring the bell. We expected one of those people at the window to answer the door, but instead, the door cracked open, just enough to see half of a person's head. It didn't look like either of those people who were always at the window. It was also super dark in the house, to the point that it looked incredibly ominous and uncanny staring at half of that person's face. This guy looked a lot younger, like in his 20s. Sarah and I tried to be friendly and introduce ourselves. The guy seemed very closed off though, and not interested in speaking. He had a very "what do you need" type of attitude about him, and when I asked if he lives with anyone else here like his parents, he said no. I mentioned the man and woman who were always at the window upstairs, and the guy on the other side of the door said he doesn't know who I'm talking about. Sarah and I felt really unsettled, so we just left. But weirdly, as we walked down the walkway back to the sidewalk, I noticed the guy behind the door was still peering half of his face through the cracked open door. I'm sure he watched us walk away until we were out of sight. That interaction was weirder and creepier than we were expecting. When we got back home, I went upstairs to our room. The upstairs of our house is only our master bedroom and the bathroom. It has 2 windows. One of the windows looks over to that house over the fence, and I looked out the window to see those 2 people looking out the window again. And even at this distance, I felt like they were staring right at me. I shut the blinds and went down to tell Sarah. We agreed it was time to plant some arborvitaes to block their window from view. The only problem is it's already the fall and it's too late to plant any kinds of trees. We have to make it through winter. After a few days of not looking outside the bedroom window or going into the backyard, one night we heard a strange knocking sound from downstairs. I told Sarah to wait in bed while I went downstairs. The knocking got louder, and I quickly discovered it wasn't the sound of knocking on one of the doors, but rather on the glass of one of the backyard windows. The blinds of it were of course shut because we didn't want those creepy people looking into our living room at night. I approached it, and yes, it was 100% a fist knocking on the glass. I considered saying, "Who's there?" but I froze and I was too scared. Instead, I flicked on the backyard light, and then the knocking stopped. I didn't even want to look out the window or door. I kept the light on and then went back upstairs to my room, where I told Sarah about the creepy knocking, but I claimed that I chased whoever it was away. I exaggerated in fear of sounding like a coward. I also didn't want her to worry. We both imagined it to have been something to do with that house, though. Nothing has happened since, but I'll have to update throughout the winter. Update. It's been 2 weeks, and we haven't seen those people at the window ever since. But last night, we heard yelling and screaming from that house. I had to open our window, and it became clear there were muffled yells coming from that house. The fact that we heard it through 2 sets of closed windows just goes to show how loud the yelling was. Then, out of nowhere, it just stopped and went quiet. We almost called the police, but ultimately didn't. I'll update again if anything else happens, but we're really getting creeped out here now. I bought a vacation mobile home almost 2 months ago. It's a complete shack, 2 small bedrooms, a little living room, kitchen, and 1 bathroom. It's simply meant as a nice, peaceful place to come to escape the city, either by myself or with my girlfriend, if I ever get one. The property has 2 acres, so it's nice and roomy too. And one of the main appeals is that it's only a 10-minute drive from a mountain that I like to go snowboarding at a few times a year. My first time there, I was decorating the place with my family. We all went to one of the local furniture outlets in the area and picked out a few couches. We actually banged this all out in 1 weekend, and thank God for my dad's pickup truck, which made transporting all this stuff easy. During all this back and forth from store to mobile home, I guess the closest neighbor noticed all the commotion, and he came over to greet us. He introduced himself as Dale. He was, I guess, what you'd expect from a local here. He had a thick Hudson Valley accent, and his dialect and mannerisms were obviously different than, I guess, us city folk are used to. Nevertheless, he seemed nice at first. We all introduced ourselves, though I knew I'd really be the one needing to get to know him since this was my property. After chatting with him for a while, we tried to resume unloading and bringing furniture into the home. He lingered for a while just watching us. My dad tried to converse more with him here and there. Eventually though, Dale said goodbye and walked back up the road to his home. We left Sunday together, and the next time I went up there was 2 weeks later. I went alone this time just to bring more stuff up like my snowboarding gear, and set up the Wi-Fi. I guess Dale saw my car pass by because soon after I got there, he knocked on the open door and stepped inside and said hello. I gave him a smile and told him to come in, which he already was. He told me the place was looking nice already. Then after some small talk, he invited me over for a beer. I said why not, and followed him up the road to his home, which is also a mobile home, maybe a little bigger than mine. We then sat outside on his deck. He grabbed me a Heineken from inside and sat across from me at the table. So I tried to get to know him. I started by asking how long he's been there. He answered with 20 years too long. I asked a few more questions and he had some similar, pessimistic yet somewhat joking responses. This kind of set the tone for the rest of the conversation. So he started asking me questions, like what brought me here, where exactly I was from, etc. All the questions he didn't ask us 2 weeks earlier. I told him I'm from Queens, and that I wanted a place to escape and to snowboard. I guess he didn't like my answer, I don't think. He started ranting about how us city folk are coming in and ruining shit, polluting the place and littering everywhere. This turned into somewhat of a debate, where I was trying to defend myself and other so-called city folk. I considered it a little debate, until I saw how heated he was getting, and he started to actually raise his voice in his thick accent, with his half-drank beer in his hand. This spiraled so out of control that at one point he said word for word, "I don't know why y'all can't just stay where the fuck you belong." I stood up and with a smile on my face said, "Okay, I think I'm gonna head back now, thank you for the beer." He didn't say anything, he just looked down at his beer as I walked away. As I was like 100 feet away from his home, he yelled out, "I'm sorry." I looked back at him and gave him a thumbs up. At the same time, I was horrified that that's gonna be my neighbor here. 20 years alone must have him losing his mind, and maybe he doesn't know how to deal with people anymore. That was the excuse I chalked up for him. But that night, while I was laying on the mattress I had on the floor, watching a movie on my laptop, I heard a voice from outside. It sounded like someone talking to themselves, cursing to themselves. I looked out the window, but I didn't see anyone out there. It was just simply too dark out. The property is big and it's mostly woods, so you could imagine how freaked out I was hearing a voice out there. The next day, Dale knocked on my door again around midday. I knew it was him because I heard him calling my name. I didn't want to deal with him again. I stayed in my room. He had to have kept knocking for 5 minutes, which in itself was weird. And at one point he said, "I know you're in there, your car is here." That freaked me out. The guy is clearly not normal by my standards, and he was already giving an early, weird, obsessive vibe. He finally left. Or did he? I continued on the rest of my day, almost uncomfortable to go outside in fear he was out there nearby watching to see if I was actually home and ignoring him. After dinner, I started watching another movie on the TV through my phone, and for the second night in a row, I heard a voice outside, even over the TV. I had to turn off the TV to look outside. Couldn't see anything, so I went out to the deck and flicked on the deck light. I saw Dale standing about 5 feet into the woods, arms flat at his sides for a second, before he could react to the light, and then he ran into the woods. I went back inside and considered calling 911. I called my dad, and long story short, he said hold off on doing that because once I call 911 on the neighbor here, is the day I don't want to show my face here anymore. I tried to just sleep through the night. Tomorrow I'd leave and go home for a month. Within an hour of me laying on the mattress, I heard Dale outside scream in an angry voice, "City piece of shit, I know you're in there. Leave, no one wants you here." He sounded like he was in a drunken fit of rage, but this was officially the moment I realized my neighbor there is a complete psychopath, and he may be the reason why I got this home at such a good price. I went home the next day, taking my valuables back home with me. I haven't been back there since, but you better believe the next time I go there, it'll be with my whole family. If he keeps it up, cops will be called. At this moment, I'm not really sure what to do, but I'm considering trying to sell this place if this keeps up, because at the moment, I'm actually scared to go up there alone. My family and I used to live in a rough neighborhood when I was 7. Even the neighbor on one side was a total creep and wasn't friendly at all. I don't personally remember much of the story because I was way too young, but my mom remembers it all too well. It was a regular night like any other, which makes this that much scarier. It was just my mom, my 2 siblings, and I at home. My dad was gone on a business trip as he would be often. That night, around midnight, someone started knocking on our door. My mom woke up and went to the front door and asked who it was. No one answered. She thought that maybe it was some kids playing ding-dong ditch, so she went back to bed. About 30 minutes later, again, someone starts knocking. She gets up and peers through the side window to see if she can spot anyone out there, but nobody is there. In any other neighborhood, this would just be assumed to be annoying kids doing some night ding-dong ditching, but in this area, you could never assume anything but the worst. My mom started to worry, so she went back to her room and grabbed my dad's shotgun, and then she sat in the living room in the dark, waiting. During all of this, she never woke any of us up, as we were all little kids at the time and she didn't want to panic us. Again, while she was in the living room now, there was more knocking. She gets up to peer through the window again, expecting to see someone new, but still no one. My mom begins shouting at whoever it is that she's gonna call the cops, and that if anyone tries to come in, she would shoot them. This threat, a legitimate threat mind you, apparently worked because that was the last of the knocking. At some time between then and the police showing up, my mom woke us just to be safe in the case that something bad happened. At about 2 in the morning, the police finally show up and do a quick search outside of our house while we waited inside. After their search, they come in and tell my mom that they had found a piece of barbed wire about 4 feet long next to the front door and asked if it belonged to my mom. She said it wasn't hers and asked why. The cop told her it belonged to whoever was knocking on the door and that they were likely planning on strangling my mom with the barbed wire when she opened the door to see who was knocking. They said that she was very smart to not open the door to see who was there, otherwise it could have cost her her life. The cops said they'd patrol the neighborhood until morning and do a thorough investigation once there was daylight. That morning, as they were searching around the house, they found footprints leading around to the back of the house leading to my bedroom window. They had also found nicks in the windowsill where the person was trying to pry open the window to break in but failed. My mom always suspected it was this one neighbor because on several occasions, she would catch him staring into our house at her through his curtains, and he was incredibly creepy and unfriendly all around. He also would be the first one to know when my dad wasn't home, since he knew what vehicle he drives. Not long after that, we moved out of that neighborhood, thank God. We had a new neighbor move in recently, which at first I was completely okay with because we never really got along with our old neighbors. But boy do I miss them now. So it was a few months back that we saw a new van in the driveway next door. No moving trucks or nothing though. We didn't see anyone moving in furniture or anything at all. It was kind of weird. To be friendly, my wife and I decided to go knock on the door to introduce ourselves, but no one opened the door, which was also weird because their car was in the driveway. We figured it wasn't a big deal. For all we knew, they were in the shower or were sleeping or something. So our bedroom is upstairs, and at one of our windows we can see into the neighbor's backyard. The house next door has a detached garage in the backyard. The new neighbor's van wasn't in the driveway all day. Then, all of a sudden, when my wife and I were reading in bed, we heard the garage next door open up. Naturally, we were curious to look out the window and see if we could catch a peek at what the man looks like. We creased the blinds a bit to look out there, and there he was, this middle-aged looking guy in a white t-shirt and jeans. The motion light over his garage was on, so that's how we saw him. He was bringing boxes from his van into his garage. We stopped spying before it got weird. A few days passed, and his car wasn't in the driveway at all, until one night, we heard his garage door open again. Every so often on this one night, we would hear some weird scraping sounds coming from out in his garage, and then occasional bangs and such, probably from him dropping boxes in the garage. But what really did make sense was that metallic scraping sound that wouldn't stop. I went over to the window to look out again. This time he caught me staring. He looked up at my window, and I felt incredibly awkward. I walked away from the window, and seconds later, I heard him close the garage door. I told my wife I'm gonna go out there and say hi. That's the only way I figured I could redeem the awkwardness I just created. I went outside in my shorts and t-shirt, and went over next door to the driveway, but the man was in his van with the engine running already, and I think when he saw me, he backed out of the driveway really fast. Then he disappeared down the street into the night. The whole thing was incredibly weird, and I was getting the vibe he was avoiding us now. I was a bit curious now what exactly was going on with all the scraping sounds by his garage. I walked into his backyard to the garage door, and something was making noise in there. I kept hearing thumping sounds. He had to have an animal in there or something. Then I heard my wife's voice call my name from our window, and she asked what the hell I was doing. I looked at her and put my finger to my lip. I tried to open his garage, but it was locked. That was enough snooping. I walked back to our house and back to bed. Later that night, I woke up to my wife shaking me, whispering that she heard our backyard gate open. I told her to stop messing with me because she was freaking me out, but she said she swears she heard it. I had to be the man of the house and go out there and look. First I took a look out the window. The lights in the neighbor's yard were off, and our yard was too dark to see anything. I went downstairs and took a look out the front door. The neighbor's van was in the driveway. He was home. I went to the backyard now and turned on the lights. As I did, I heard someone running away to the side of the house. Then the backyard gate slammed shut. I was horrified, but I made myself angry and chased after them. I ran to the gate and then to the front of the house, then to the street. I was the only one out there, yet I felt as though I was being watched from any possible direction. I went back inside the house, told my wife that someone was indeed in the yard, but I didn't see them, and she asked me if I thought it was the neighbor. I told her I honestly don't know. But the next day, I went to the neighbor 2 doors down, Gene, and asked him if he had met the new guy yet. He said no, but that he'd keep being awoken to sounds late at night coming from his garage. I told him about how someone snuck into our yard the night before, and he found that equally freaky and weird. We agreed to text each other and go over together the next time we'd hear weird noises to finally meet this guy. So the next day was Saturday. As I was opening all the living room blinds in the morning, I saw that it was like the first or second time that the neighbor's car was in the driveway during the day. Then I looked at his house, at one of the windows. There he was, standing stiff as a statue, looking at me as if he were waiting for me to open the blinds. I expected him to look away, but we just locked eyes. Unbroken eye contact for a solid 20 seconds. I waved because I didn't know what else to do. When he didn't wave back or even crack half a smile, I started calling for my wife, and when I got her, I told her to look out the window, but by then he was no longer standing at the window. I said to hell with it at this point, and went next door again with my wife and knocked on the door and rang the bell. I felt knocking is a bit more assertive. I heard one loud slam from inside the house, but he never came to the door. This was the last straw. I went over to Gene's house again, and when he opened the door, he asked me if I saw his texts yet. I said no, and I also didn't have my phone on me. So he told me that last night he heard a muffled crying sound from outside, in the new guy's direction, and he texted me about it. Gene came out with me to knock on the neighbor's door one more time, and once again, no answer. We all by this point, including Gene's wife and my wife, knew something is seriously off here. The next day, the van was gone again, and it's been almost 2 weeks and the van hasn't returned. We don't know where he went. We don't know if or when he's coming back. These past few nights, either my wife or I wake up in the middle of the night thinking we hear noises outside, and when we go to the window to see if the van's in the driveway next door, it's not. It's crazy none of us even know the guy's name, and we're still trying to put the pieces together, because one night I heard something definitely alive in that garage making noises, and then another night, Gene heard what he thought to be a muffled crying. Obviously he'll most likely be back, but I don't think any of us are looking forward to it, and maybe for peace of mind, we should anonymously report him. My name is Garrett, and this took place when I was a sophomore in college. When I didn't get a dorm after freshman year, I scrambled for off-campus housing. Long story short, I ended up in a co-op, part of a 3-house community that was sort of near campus, but not really. It wasn't ideal, but it was cheap, and I didn't have many options. Plus, I had a bike, so I didn't really mind the extra travel time. Most of the residents were young students like me, but there were a few exceptions. There were a handful of alumni, 1 or 2 TAs, and a few older people getting their degrees later on in life. But the person who immediately stood out to me was an older woman who lived in one of the other houses. From what I could tell, she was maybe in her late 50s, even though she looked a little older than that. She had graying hair and walked with a sort of limp, like she had some kind of back injury. She was really quiet and mostly kept to herself, and she always had this blank expression on her face. I assumed she had some kind of connection to the university, maybe faculty, or maybe an alumni, but no one explained and I didn't ask. The first time I saw her do something strange was in our common kitchen, which was a little weird to begin with because the 2 other houses had their own kitchen, so I wasn't sure why she'd be hanging out in ours. She wasn't cooking or eating or even talking to anyone. She was just standing there while the rest of us were talking and running around, making dinner and listening to music. She didn't try and join in, she just watched us blankly. I caught eyes with her a few times, and part of me got the feeling that she was watching me specifically, even though I knew that was unlikely. No one acknowledged her, which I thought was a little weird too. Maybe they knew something I didn't. Later that week, I was doing some homework in my room when I saw her again. I glanced out my bedroom window, and there she was, staring up at me. As if that wasn't strange enough by itself, she wasn't even on the sidewalk, but rather in the middle of the street. It was getting late, and it was decently cold too, so she must have been freezing out there. I couldn't tell if she was looking into my window or just in the general direction of the house, but I felt like she was staring at me specifically. I don't know why I did it, but I waved at her, trying to be friendly. The moment I did, I instantly regretted it. She didn't wave back. Instead, she jumped up and down a few times like she was excited and then ran towards one of the other houses, presumably hers. I felt kind of sick. Not only had I acknowledged her, but I had confirmed that she had been looking into my room the entire time, and even if she hadn't, she now knew which room was mine. Later that night, I asked one of my housemates about her. He told me that that woman had always been there and that I should try my best to ignore her like the rest of them did. I inquired further about her, but the guy genuinely didn't know anything and said he was just repeating what someone had told him when he moved in. It didn't sit right with me, so I asked around until I got some semblance of an answer. One of the seniors in the specific house she lived in told me that she was associated with the university and was a little kooky, but that she didn't have a history of violence or getting physical. I asked him why no one found that as strange as I did, and he told me that they really couldn't control who lived there, as that decision was up to the property manager. I wasn't fully satisfied with that answer, but there was nothing I could do, so I tried to just block her out of my mind. But then it got worse. One night, I walked out of my room and nearly ran into her. She was in the hallway, standing right in front of my door. I literally jumped back because she caught me so off guard. It was past midnight on like a Tuesday, so the house was mostly dead. She didn't say anything when she saw me. She barely even reacted. Instead, she just turned and walked away as if I were the one who had intruded on her. I'm not going to go into every little detail, but there were several more occurrences like that one where I caught her either snooping somewhere where she had no business being or doing something she had no business doing. At some point, I lost my room key. All 3 houses had once been part of the same hotel, so all the rooms had personal locks and keys. It was a co-op, so most people just left their doors unlocked, but I was someone who couldn't sleep comfortably knowing someone could just walk into my room, so losing my key was a big deal. Everyone had a spare, including me, but I was pissed because I'd have to go make a copy of the key, and that was an extra annoyance I couldn't afford at the time. A few nights later, I woke up randomly in the night. I wasn't sure why at first, but then I heard it. There was a soft bumping coming from my closet every 20 seconds or so. It sounded like something shifting behind the door, like something was moving inside of my closet. I'm not one to scare easily, and I'm definitely not one to be helpless in a dangerous situation, so I was going to deal with this myself. I quietly got out of bed and took a deep breath. I slowly walked over to the closet, trying to keep my breathing under control. My heart was racing. In one fluid motion, I ripped the closet door open and screamed like a crazy person. Just as I expected, the woman was in there. She had one of my ties wrapped around her neck, and her eyes were wide open. She was holding a kitchen knife with her other hand. My scream must have startled her, because before I could react, she lunged at me with the knife outstretched. I screamed again, only this one wasn't pretend. It was a scream of pure fear. I wrestled her to the ground and was able to disarm her pretty easily, given how frail and small she was. That didn't make the situation any less terrifying, though. She kicked and fought and bit as I pinned her to the ground, screaming the whole time. I yelled for help, and I heard some doors slam, followed by some of my housemates running down the hall. My friend Lee immediately helped me immobilize the woman, and the 2 of us kept her pinned while someone else called the police. The rest of the night was a blur. The police got there quickly and arrested her on the spot. By that point, she had stopped screaming, but she refused to say anything either, which was extremely unsettling. The cops found my room key on her. Real big shocker there. A few weeks later, we got our answer about who she was. Apparently, she was the property manager's sister, who he had been letting live there under the radar. She had severe mental health issues, and instead of getting her proper care, he had just thrown her into one of the unoccupied rooms. I believe the property manager was eventually arrested for negligence and a slew of other things, and rightfully so. I honestly blame him so much more for what happened than her. If anything, I feel bad for her, but my pity won't erase the fact that she tried to kill me. I could have lost my life that night. I have no idea why she seemed so interested in me specifically, but I can only hope nothing like that ever happens to me again. I'm graduating soon, and I'm definitely going to miss college, but I don't think I'll ever be able to look back on my time here without thinking about that night. This isn't really my story, but I essentially watched the whole thing happen, so I'm telling it anyway. I've lived in a modest 2-story home with my husband Benjamin for the better part of 20 years now. All of our kids are out living their own lives, and I couldn't be prouder. What I'm about to tell you happened last year. Someone had just moved into the house across the street, which was really nice because I was getting sick of looking out at a vacant house all the time. I'm retired, so I spend a lot of time on my front porch, knitting, reading, enjoying the weather with my husband, you name it. I also listen to a lot of true crime podcasts out there, and sometimes I'll just play music. The person who moved into the house across the street was a young guy, maybe mid-20s. He drove an expensive-looking BMW and always dressed in flashy clothing, so I figured he was either well-off or seriously pretending. I hope I'm not giving the wrong impression about him. He was actually really sweet. He introduced himself to us after a few days. His name was Quinn, and he was a few years out of college, like I had guessed. He was a really bright guy and got along really well with Benjamin. They laughed and talked about sports, and Benjamin even dropped a few of his own college stories that I hadn't heard in a long time. Quinn said he worked in the entertainment industry, and that he did freelance work for some internet personality person, whatever that means. It kind of went over my head, but it must have been lucrative. He looked pretty wealthy, like I said. He talked about stocks with Benjamin, and told us about some of the investments he was making. All in all, he seems like a nice guy. Things were normal for a few months. Like I said, I spent a lot of time on my porch, so Quinn would often wave to me when leaving his house, and I always waved back. I can't remember exactly when, but I started noticing the same girl going over to Quinn's house every so often. She drove a little white convertible and she was pretty, young, blonde, the type of girl you'd expect a guy like him to date. To be frank, she dressed a bit scandalously, which I didn't fully appreciate. I figured she was his girlfriend, maybe checking on the house while he was out. She had her own house key, so it made sense. It became a regular thing. Once, maybe twice a week, I'd see that car roll up while Quinn was gone. She'd go inside, stay for a while, then leave. I didn't really understand what she was doing, but young people date differently these days, so I kept my thoughts to myself. Then, one evening, I saw them together. Quinn pulled into his driveway with her in the passenger seat. That confirmed it. She was his girlfriend, just as I had assumed. But shortly after that day, things started getting tense. At least, that's what it seemed like. One afternoon, I was out tending to my little garden when I heard shouting from across the street. Quinn and the girl were standing in the driveway, yelling at each other. I couldn't catch what they were arguing about, but I didn't need to. She kept throwing her hands in the air, practically spitting her words at him. It looked like she was going to strike him. Eventually, she got in the car, slammed the door, and tore off down the road. Quinn shook his head and went back inside. I don't even think he noticed me. I figured it was a lover's spat. Every couple fights, and it wasn't my place to butt in where I was unwelcome. But then I saw that girl's car in front of his house again when he wasn't home. Not once, not twice, but multiple times. I told Benjamin, and he said it was rude to pry and that I should just leave the poor boy alone, which I agreed with. But then came the night everything went sideways. Benjamin and I were asleep when we woke up to sirens blaring outside. We rushed outside, joining the handful of neighbors who had come out to see what was going on. Quinn's house was swarming. Police cars, an ambulance, the whole nine. We watched as the cops emerged from his house with that girl in handcuffs. She didn't struggle or scream, just accepted what was going on and stared ahead with a blank expression. We saw Quinn being rushed outside on a stretcher. He was a bloody mess, and I gasped at the sight. We didn't see him for a week after that. I was worried sick. When he finally came back, Benjamin and I walked over to check on him. He let us in without hesitation and told us everything. Apparently, that girl, her name was Ellie, had confessed to everything, making things easy for the police. For starters, she wasn't supposed to have his house key. She had stolen his spare and made a copy without him knowing. According to him, she started asking him for things. Fancy dinners, jewelry, expensive trips. When he hesitated, she got possessive and angry, which was when things started going downhill in their relationship. Every time she had shown up unannounced to his house, he hadn't been aware. She had access to his location through his phone, which I didn't even know was possible. She had gone through all of his stuff, but worst of all, she had planted hidden cameras in his room. Every time she went back to his house when he wasn't there, she was replacing the camera batteries and making sure they were still working. The argument between them that I overheard was Quinn's attempt at breaking up with her.
She refused, and Quinn reluctantly agreed to go on a break. Ellie had seen everything through the cameras, and the next night, she went to his house with a knife. I'm not going to explain the rest, you get the idea. Somehow, Quinn managed to get her to the grounds, but not before she seriously injured him. The doctors said he was an inch away from needing surgery, or dying. Benjamin and I tried to console him, but he was visibly shaken. The last thing he said before we left was that he had learned his lesson about flaunting his money, especially around pretty girls. He moved out not long after. He said he didn't feel safe in that house anymore, and that his ex had tons of friends just like her, and he didn't feel comfortable with the thought that they might have known where he lived. We never saw him again. I pray to God he's doing okay. No one should ever have to go through something like that, especially not someone as young as him. When I moved into my new place, I was just looking for a fresh start. I won't get into the details, but let's just say I had a bad situation with an ex that made staying in my old city impossible. I ran into some money early in life and made some bad decisions about the kind of women I surrounded myself with. Lesson learned. The neighborhood I moved to is really nice. Low crime, quiet, mostly families. The houses here are really spaced out, which was partially what drew me there. But for some reason, the property next to mine is much closer in proximity than most of the other properties are to each other. And by the way, that house next door is huge. When I first saw it, I thought I could easily fit a family of 10. That's honestly what I assumed at first, that a big family lived there, grandparents and everything. But I could not have been more wrong. Even though I try to be low-key, I wasn't going to be a rude neighbor. I took it upon myself to introduce myself to everyone in the neighborhood. For whatever reason, I decided to introduce myself to my next-door neighbors last. I couldn't tell you why. Everyone else I met seemed really sweet and genuine. I'd say 90% of them were parents of young children. And yes, they were all slightly intimidating, purely based on how successful they seemed to be. I wasn't too sure how a younger guy like myself would easily blend into a community like that, but that was more of a personal concern. When I got around to meeting my next-door neighbor, my social battery was mostly drained from having spent the day making small talk with strangers. I knew if I just went back home, I was never going to be as motivated to meet them, so I just sucked it up and walked up their driveway. I had gotten accustomed to being greeted by someone middle-aged, so when a young-looking dude in a mullet opened the door, I was a little taken aback. Hell, he looked even younger than me, which was definitely a shock. I recovered quickly and went ahead with my new-to-the-neighborhood spiel. As I went on, he flashed me this massive smile and actually cut me off before I could even finish talking. He said something along the lines of, "Oh wow, someone who was born in my decade, what a nice surprise." I laughed and told him the same thing, venting to him about how out of place I felt as a single guy in his late 20s amongst so many families with kids. He told me not to worry about that, and that most of the people who lived here kept to themselves, which was kind of a relief for me. He introduced himself as Damon and told me I should come by for a drink sometime. I shrugged my shoulders and said, hell, why not right now? To which I expected him to laugh and invite me in. Instead, though, he looked over his shoulder like he was scanning his living room, and then he turned back to me, saying he wished he could, but he was busy working. I asked him what he did for work, because it just seemed like a normal follow-up question to what he said, and he dropped his smile a bit. After a weird stare, he laughed and just said, finance, but didn't elaborate any more than that, which I thought was a bit strange. I told him fair enough, and asked if he had any roommates. To my surprise, he told me he lived there alone, which was absolutely insane to me given how big the house was. We chit-chatted for a few more minutes, and he gave me his number before going back inside. I was excited that someone my age lived here, especially because he seemed like a really chill guy, but I couldn't get over how odd it was for someone like that to live all alone. And yeah, I know I was essentially doing the same thing, but you have to keep in mind my house wasn't even half the size of his. Anyway, I went back home and got on with my life. That was about 6 months ago. For a few weeks after that, nothing eventful really happened. I texted Damon a few days after he gave me his number to try and set something up, but he'd always complain about how busy he was and how sorry he was that we couldn't hang out. Eventually, I gave up with him. Not in a hostile way, just in a you-do-you kind of way. I'm definitely not the type of person to bend over backwards for someone who seems disinterested. I never saw anyone coming or going from Damon's place. No visitors, no parties, no girls, nothing. He never even got takeout delivered, which was strange to me because his car was always in the driveway. I genuinely didn't know what he ate because I literally never saw him leave the house. The guy lived like a ghost. I work from home, and the office in my house is on the 3rd floor, which overlooks Damon's property, if you're wondering how I knew so much about his living habits. I know it sounds obsessive and a little creepy, but his house was also just a glance away from my monitor, so I couldn't help but look over from time to time. One night, it was a Wednesday night, I remember that distinctly. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of loud music. I sleep with my windows open, so that's probably how I woke up so easily. At first, I thought I was imagining it, or it was part of a really vivid dream I was having, but I was wrong. I got out of bed and peeked out my window, and there they were, 7 or so cars lined up in Damon's driveway. There was no mistaking it, he was having a party. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not the type to complain about some noise. I've been to my fair share of house parties, but it was the middle of the week, and the volume was insane. I figured I'd just go over, knock, and ask him to turn it down. I threw on a hoodie and walked over. It was a full-blown party, that much was clear from outside. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. I pulled out my phone to text Damon, but I decided against it, knowing he'd probably ignore me and give me some BS excuse the following morning. I knocked on the door again, harder this time. Still nothing. I reached for the handle, half expecting it to be locked, but to my surprise, the door swung open. Inside, the first thing I saw was a pile of shoes in the foyer, at least 10 pairs, but there was something off. There was literally no one in there. I moved further in, expecting to see people in the living room, maybe the kitchen, but it was completely empty. There weren't even any drinks left out. I could hear people over the music that was playing in the background though, which I didn't understand. But then I really listened to it, and everything hit me all at once. It wasn't even music, really. It was a recording, a literal recording of people laughing, yelling, clinking glasses. The whole party was fake, all of it. But that didn't make sense to me. It still didn't explain the shoes or the cars. There were people in that house, that much was certain. I should have turned around right then, but I needed to know what was going on. I moved discreetly around the house until I saw a door that was slightly ajar. I gently pushed it open, and it led down to the basement. I'm not sure how I knew, but something told me what I was looking for was downstairs. It was dark down those stairs, with the exception of a very faint light coming from somewhere I couldn't see. There was no reason to go down there, I knew that, but I did it anyway. I got to the bottom of the stairs and looked around. The light was coming from another door somewhere deeper in the basement. I crept towards it, and as I got closer, I started to pick up on another noise I hadn't been able to hear earlier over the music. It sounded almost mechanical. It was this heavy, rhythmic grinding, like heavy machinery or a buzzsaw or something. I got a little closer, close enough to see through the crack. There were 3 people standing in there, looking across the room at something that was out of view. They were all older-looking guys, significantly older than Damon. They were wearing heavy-duty work clothes and had on these protective goggles and thick rubber gloves. I also realized they were wearing what looked like work boots, even though I had seen all those other shoes upstairs. Under different circumstances, I would have assumed that they were construction workers. I really wanted to see what they were looking at, but it was too far out of view. After a few seconds of me just standing there, I started to pick up on this awful bleach smell, or some kind of cleaning solution. That's what did it for me. I started to feel this awful pit in my stomach, like my life was in danger. I can't explain it. I turned to leave, trying to be as quiet as possible. As I was finding my way back to the stairs, the light from behind me suddenly dimmed, like someone had shut the door behind me. I didn't actually hear the door over the music, but I felt it. I sprinted up the stairs as fast as I could. I ran through the house and burst out the front door. I didn't run directly to my house. I jumped my own fence and made it to the backyard. I slipped in through my side door, locking it behind me. My chest was pounding, but under no circumstances could I let Damon or any of those other guys know it was me who had been snooping around. I gathered myself and went up to my office, making sure all the lights up there were off. I crouched down below the window and peeked over at Damon's house. There was no one there. But then, a few minutes later, the front door flew open and like 8 guys poured out, scanning the yard, the driveway, the street, but Damon wasn't with them. I could tell because everyone looked older, like those first guys I had seen. A few of them looked like they were arguing about something, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. One of the men actually shoved one of the other ones, and I thought they were about to start fighting in the street, but they didn't. Eventually, they all went back inside, and the music stopped soon after that. I stood at the window, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I thought about calling the cops, but what would I even say? The music wasn't playing anymore, and there was no real crime I could actually report. The thing I couldn't understand was how none of my other neighbors had a problem with the loud music, especially since most of them had children. I figured if they hadn't been able to hear it and I called the police, Damon would know it was me. And the shoes, I had no idea what that was about either. The people I had seen were all wearing boots. So did they bring extra pairs of shoes just to leave in the foyer? I had too many questions and I didn't know what to do, so I just went to bed. The next morning, I woke up and looked out my bedroom window. Every single car was gone, including Damon's. I went upstairs to try and get some work done, but I couldn't concentrate and found myself looking over at Damon's house every 5 seconds. After a few hours of his car not being there, I decided to go for a walk, partly to clear my head, but mostly to take some low-key glances through his windows. Nothing, though. Days passed and Damon still didn't return, or his car didn't at least. I was baffled with every passing day. I still couldn't figure out how my other neighbors had been able to sleep through all the noises that night, so I just straight up asked them. I went to a few houses and asked them if they had heard the party he had a few nights ago. No one knew what I was talking about, even after I told them which house it was coming from and how late it was. I thought I was going crazy. That was a few months ago now. The crazy thing is Damon still hasn't returned, and it's clear no one is maintaining his house, as the grass is starting to get really long, and there's an untouched pile of packages leaning against his front door. I don't know what to make of this. It could be nothing, but I feel like no one would go to such lengths to disguise what they were doing with a fake party, unless it was something illegal. But would people going to such lengths really forget something as important as locking the front door? Maybe that's what those guys had been arguing about. I really have no idea, and the fact that none of my other neighbors seemed bothered by it makes me think I'm involved in some huge conspiracy or something. I know I'm just being paranoid, but I just have so many unanswered questions. When Damon returns, if he ever does, I'm debating whether or not I should just go and straight up ask him.
I'm currently in a predicament, and quite frankly, I don't know what to do. I'll start from the beginning. 5 years ago, my next-door neighbor Charlie, or Charles as we call him, informed us of his 14-year-old son's disappearance. He reported it to the police, it was on the news, it was everywhere. Me and my wife felt absolutely awful and always offered to help them out in any way we could. As the years passed with no word of their son, we assumed they eventually came to terms with it and realized the worst had probably happened. Me and my wife never had the nerve to ask if the body ever turned up. Occasionally, Charles and his wife would invite me and my wife over for a barbecue during the warmer months. We noticed neither of the two were ever the same since their son had gone missing. Charles' wife Kathy was always quieter and more reserved, and Charles just seemed more awkward and nervous, both understandable to a certain extent. Fast forward a couple of years later to just last week. Charles came over to me when I was taking out the garbage and asked to borrow a shovel. Without hesitation, I ran to get him my best shovel, not asking why he needed it. He thanked me and said he just had to do some work in his backyard and he'd get it back to me by tomorrow. He then disappeared into his backyard. I went inside, and when I was by one of my upstairs windows that has a clear view into Charlie's backyard, I could see he was digging out a really big hole in the ground. He seemed to be struggling a bit. He's 56 after all. I figured I'd go grab my second shovel and help him out. As I entered his backyard and called his name, he looked up from what he was doing, dropped my shovel, and hurried over to me, saying, No, it's okay, Tim, I got it. Please, just leave. I said, What's wrong with you? It's not a big deal. Mainly because of his bizarre reaction. He told me I will not allow you to use that shovel in my backyard, and then pointed to the gate as if I were a dog.
I was so taken aback by how he was acting that I just left without saying another word. I went upstairs to spy on him through the window. He was digging the hole for at least another half hour. When it finally looked like he was done, he started looking around, like up high at neighboring houses as if to check and make sure nobody was watching. And then, before I could think to hide, he spotted me at my window. All I could do at that point was casually walk away. He's up to something, and I wanted to find out what. I continued to look at his backyard every so often, but he wasn't digging anymore. I figured he knew I was watching now and would wait until it was dark out. And I was exactly right. At 1:30 in the morning, I heard the sound of a shovel hitting the dirt outside. It was too dark to see anything from my window now, so I snuck outside quietly and looked over the fence in the backyard. I could see him digging loud and clear now. When he went inside his house, I took that opportunity to sneak into his backyard and take a look at what was in the hole he was digging. The moonlight alone revealed a small piece of a black garbage bag protruding from the dirt at the bottom of the hole. I looked at his back door and back at the hole. I did this 3 more times, deciding whether or not to see what was in the bag. In the end, I decided to run back to my backyard, and it was a good thing I did because he came back outside seconds later. But he wasn't digging. In fact, he disappeared to the other side of his house and didn't come back. I went back into my house and quietly got back into bed, trying not to wake up my wife. The next day, the first thing I did was look out my window to see that the hole in the ground was completely patched up in Charles' backyard. I also noticed that his SUV was parked in the street now instead of his driveway. I don't know what happened throughout the rest of that night, but I'm disturbed to think that what was at the bottom of that hole might have been his son's body. For all I know, he dug up that hole to remove whatever he had previously buried down there and drive it somewhere else to dump it. This is all speculation, call me crazy if you want. I haven't told anyone, not even my wife. And quite frankly, I don't know what to do. Charles never gave me back my shovel. I'm not going to ask him for it. In fact, he's been avoiding me ever since. And something disturbing happened yesterday. I by coincidence happened to look out my window across to Charlie's house and caught him standing at one of his windows looking into mine. When he saw me, he shut his blinds, and that was in the middle of the day. I have no idea what to do, but I'm honestly terrified. I've lived in 3 houses in my life, 2 with my family and my current house by myself. We lived in the first house for the first 15 years of my life, and the second house the next 7 before I moved out to my current home. This experience happened in my first home when I was 15, within the last few months of my family living in that house. I don't remember my family ever being really friendly with the neighbors. In fact, there were 2 kids living next door with their dad that me and my brother had only talked to maybe once or twice our entire lives, as bizarre as that is, though we did know both of their names, Eric and Todd. One day, me and my brother, who is 5 years younger than me, were outside playing basketball in the driveway. That was when one of the 2 boys next door, Todd, came outside and walked over to us, initiating a conversation. I don't remember what we said to each other quote for quote, but I remember the first thing that he asked us was if it was true that we were moving. As the older brother, I did most, if not all, of the talking. Todd was probably the same age as me. I never actually asked. By the end of the conversation, he invited me to come with he and his brother to shoot BB guns by the river in the woods down the road the next day. I agreed since it was the weekend and I didn't have anything going on anyway. My little brother asked if he could come at the last second, not under the assumption that he was automatically invited as well. Todd said yeah and then walked away. Late the next day, around an hour before dusk, Eric and Todd rang the doorbell. We were quick to answer the door because our parents didn't know that we were going out to shoot BB guns. Walking down the sidewalks with Todd and Eric decked out in camo gear and carrying a duffel bag of BB guns was really strange. The level of seriousness these 2 clearly had in this was really weird to me and my brother, and we kept meeting eyes, holding in our laughter a couple of times because of it. We got to the woods having spoken very few words. I could already tell these 2 were kids of few words. Maybe why we hadn't met them officially until that point. Todd dropped the duffel bag onto the ground and unzipped it, while Eric aggressively snapped a branch off a tree and threw it into the river. Me and my brother looked at each other again, this time not finding it as funny. Todd pulled out a couple of guns and handed them to me and my brother, and that's when Todd dropped the bomb and told us they were real guns. Eric grabbed a loaded gun from the bag and began firing at trees across the river. When I realized he wasn't joking about the guns being real, I was in a mix of anger and confusion. I grabbed the gun from my brother's hands and placed both of them back in the bag. I told them we weren't comfortable with this and had to leave. Eric stopped firing, and they both looked at us with expressions that seemed half angry. One of the two boys yelled a curse word at us as we were walking away. I always had a feeling these two were bad kids, but this confirmed it. I told my brother not to speak to them anymore for the remainder of our time living there. We told our parents at the dinner table that night that they were really weird kids, but we didn't mention the gun thing. I woke up that night to a breeze of cold air hitting me in the face. My window was open all the way. I felt something hard press up against the back of my head as I was looking out the window, and somebody behind me going, "Shh, shh." Somehow I didn't scream or jump, I just stayed calm. I was able to understand what was going on surprisingly quickly. I heard Todd's voice in a whisper behind my head. He told me if I ever told anybody, especially his dad, about the guns or the visit, he would come back and kill me and my entire family. I replied in a quiet, shaky voice, "Okay." He pushed my head with his gun before leaving through my window. Every night thereafter for months, I would catch either Todd or Eric at a certain window of their house, looking into either my or my brother's room. Their behavior became more and more strange as we got closer to the date of our move. Just a week before we moved, a rock was thrown at my window one night at like 1 a.m. I opened my window and saw Todd aiming a pistol up at the window, and feeling like I was about to die, I dove for the ground, only to hear the two boys crack up in laughter. I heard one of them refer to me as a fucking retard. There were two other instances that week where the two would harass either me or my brother, and ultimately I couldn't think of a more perfect time for us to have moved and gotten out of there. After all these years, neither me nor my brother told anybody about the boys or their threats. All I know is those two boys were trouble, and it was a good thing we got out of there when we did. At the time I'm writing this happened 2 weeks ago. I've always hated just about all of my neighbors. I'm fresh out of college and I'm living on my own, but that comes at a price. I'm living in a really shitty area, the only place I could afford a house. So I'm not bound to have the ideal neighbors. The neighbors on one side always have their music blasting, while the neighbors on the other side are the creepiest people I've ever met in my life. It's two people living next door, one woman in her 60s who's not friendly at all and honestly doesn't seem all there, and a slightly younger woman who has some kind of severe mental disabilities. I have no idea what the relationship is between the two. I would commonly be sitting on my front porch when I'd look over next door and see the older woman holding the younger woman back as she'd be having some kind of freak-out episode. She'd have her arms crossed and she'd quickly rock back and forth while screaming and making noises. Sometimes she'd even look over and point at me and mumble stuff to the other woman. It's quite disturbing, actually. Sometimes I even go inside when I get too uncomfortable. Anyway, it was a night like any other. I had to go to bed early for work in the morning. However, the next door neighbors were making an unusual amount of noise. I could hear the deranged woman screaming and throwing a fit as the older woman yelled in distress. This went on for about an hour and I couldn't take it anymore. I marched over to the house next door and banged on the door. The older woman answered and greeted me with a "What the hell do you want?" I asked as politely as I could to keep the noise down. In response, she raised her eyebrows and tilted her head down, clearly annoyed by my request. Just then, the younger woman entered the living room, screaming "How dare you!" repeatedly. The older woman held her back from approaching me, and then slammed the door in my face. I had no idea what just happened, but I felt like I didn't accomplish what I came there for. I walked back to my bed in defeat. However, I realized they had finally gone silent next door. I was able to get some sleep at last. Well, I woke up, feeling like the night went way too fast. I looked at my clock and saw that it was only 3 in the morning. My head fell back into the pillow in relief, but pretty soon I thought I could hear something come from downstairs. I got out of my bed and went over to my door just to make sure I wasn't hearing things. When I didn't hear any other sounds, I went back to bed. I woke up once again to a dark room. Only 20 minutes had passed since I'd fallen back asleep. I didn't know what could have woken me up though. And then I heard. I panicked and tried to find my phone on my bedside desk as a source of light, but when I found it, I didn't dare turn the light on. I looked around the dark room in silence, trying to find some kind of dark figure in the room. I looked at every corner of the room, and even though it was so dark, I could tell there wasn't anybody standing there. This time I heard where it was coming from. I turned to the edge of my bed and saw a black shadowy circle-like object right at the edge of the wooden wall of my bed. When the light of my phone revealed that black object to be the face of the deranged woman from next door, she screamed like the lunatic she was. She screamed as if she were a vampire in the light. I screamed as well. I screamed as I clumsily ran for the door and tripped halfway, looking back to see the woman following me. I slammed the bedroom door behind me and ran all the way downstairs, where I locked the door leading to the upstairs. I called the cops as the woman pounded on the door, screaming incomprehensible things. When the cops showed up, I told them the woman lives next door and that she was mentally insane. The older woman from next door came over after hearing all the commotion and spoke with the cops, pleading with them to let her go, but they insisted they had to take her in for at least the night. One of the officers asked me if I wanted to press charges, and as he asked this, the older woman gave me the most evil, hateful stare imaginable. I chose not to press charges, but her stare didn't change. The officers drove the ill woman away, while the older woman continued to stare at me as she walked back to her house. 5 minutes later, I saw her get in her car and drive away. These two still live next to me. I'm seriously considering moving out because the creepy woman next door makes it clear she despises me. And I've concluded that the mentally ill woman is not only terrifying, but dangerous as well.
My name is Mike, and this happened last year when my fiance and I bought our first starter home together. We're an Asian couple, which is relevant to the story. It was a small 2-story house in a basic suburban town in Georgia. There was nothing special about it, but to us it was supposed to be special. It was a typical quiet street, decent backyard, cheap fence, and regular-looking houses lined up next to each other. We felt lucky to even buy a house at our age, so it was a very exciting point in our lives that was quite literally robbed from us, which you'll soon hear why. The first few days were normal. We unpacked, met a few neighbors, and tried to settle in. The neighbor on our right side was a friendly older couple. The neighbor across the street waved and came across to say hi when he saw us. But the house on our left side was different. We didn't see anyone come out of it for the first few days. The curtains were always shut. The house looked clean and normal, don't get me wrong, but it was always kind of dark inside, like no one was home even though there was a car in the driveway. The only time we noticed anything was when we saw someone standing inside their front window one afternoon. My fiancée and I were carrying groceries in from the car when she whispered something to me about it. I looked over and saw a man standing behind the curtain, only half visible but totally watching us. He didn't wave. As soon as he saw us glance at him, he walked away from the window. It was weird, but we didn't think too much about it. Some people are just quiet or awkward. Over the next week, we started noticing him more often. Not outside, but inside his house. I would catch him standing in his living room window sometimes when I left for work. My fiancée told me she saw him in the upstairs window once when she was getting the mail. Every time we noticed him, he seemed to be watching us, but never in a way where he stayed long. The second we looked back, he was gone. One night, something happened that made both of us uneasy in a way we couldn't ignore. Around midnight, I was getting ready for bed when I walked past our upstairs window.
Our bedroom window faced directly toward his house. When I looked, out of habit, I saw him in his upstairs window. This time he wasn't halfway hidden or standing behind a curtain. He was fully visible. He stood straight up with his face turned toward our bedroom window. I froze for a second because I wasn't sure if I was actually seeing it right, but the second he realized I saw him, he stepped back away from the window. I remember saying to my fiancée with a laugh, "Oh great, our neighbor's a creep." The next morning, the man came to our door. It was the first time we saw him outside. He knocked politely and introduced himself as Gordon. He apologized for looking like he was spying the night before. He told me he had been putting something on his window ledge and didn't mean to look into our room. He smiled the whole time, and it was a welcoming enough smile to give me a bit of relief. I'm not saying I loved the guy instantly. There was definitely something slightly off about him, but the apology was appreciated. I didn't want to be rude, so I told him it was fine. When I went back inside, I told my fiancé he seemed somewhat nice, but a little weird. We decided to forget about it. A week later, something else happened that we couldn't ignore. In the middle of the night, my fiancée shook me awake, telling me she heard someone in the yard. I was half asleep, but I got up to check the window. Gotta do what you gotta do as the man of the house. When I looked outside, I saw someone walking in our yard. Unless it was fucking Bigfoot, it was definitely a person. A full-grown man walking around like he was looking for something. My first reaction was to shout out "hey," even though I knew that wasn't the smartest thing to do. As soon as I yelled, the person walked fast toward the gate and slammed it shut behind him. Since we didn't have anything in the backyard yet besides some gardening tools, I didn't think someone was trying to steal anything, and I didn't bother to check the backyard. I did check the front windows though, and didn't see anyone. I didn't go outside because I didn't feel safe, and eventually, my fiancée and I went back to sleep, even though we felt uneasy. A few nights after that, the same thing happened again. My fiancée woke me up, telling me she heard rustling outside. This time we both heard it clearly. It sounded like someone was shimmying something. I can't say what, but best description I could give was some kind of lock. I went to the window again, and sure enough, I saw someone in the backyard. I felt my whole body tense up this time. I yelled that I was calling the cops. The person walked out of the yard and again slammed the gate the same way, but this time I saw enough of the man's face and posture to know it looked exactly like Gordon. I yelled "Gordon," but he didn't respond. He just walked away like nothing happened. This time I went outside. I checked the yard, then the sides of the house. I took a deep breath and told myself I have to confront this now. I walked over to Gordon's house and knocked. He answered within seconds, which told me he was awake the whole time. He smiled like he always did, and started laughing while telling me that it was him in the yard. He said he was chasing away kids who always jumped the fences in the neighborhood, and he caught them jumping from his backyard into our backyard. He said it happens all the time and told me I'd get used to it. He kept smiling the whole time, but something about the smile didn't feel normal. It felt like something was behind it. I saw hate in his eyes, I swear. I didn't argue with him. I just told him I understood and went back home. But deep down, I didn't believe a word he said. The next day, he came over again and invited us to come to his house for Chinese food the next night, which would be a Friday. We felt like saying yes would at least clear the awkwardness between us and we could just be cordial neighbors. We went to his house around 7 p.m. that Friday. The second we walked in, the atmosphere felt uncomfortable. Gordon seemed relatively intoxicated and got only more drunk as he kept sipping more wine. He said he ordered a bunch of Chinese food and made a little weird comment like, "I know you guys love Chinese food," then laughed. He made little passive-aggressive comments here and there. Eventually the food arrived and he paid, and we offered to help him set up the table, but he almost yelled when he said no. The whole dinner felt tense. Then, as he finished more and more wine, he started acting more differently. He started making rude comments that were less passive and more direct. He said things that made it pretty clear he didn't like that an Asian couple moved into the neighborhood. At first we tried ignoring it, hoping it would stop, but then he got louder and more angry. I mean it, he actually started getting himself angry as he talked about how this town had a history of being white. He started saying things that made both of us feel unsafe, honestly. Then he told us that it was in fact him going into our backyard those nights. He didn't deny it or try to hide it. The climax of the night was when he yelled at us that we were not welcome there and that the neighborhood wasn't for people like us. At that point, we didn't say anything. We just stood up and left. We walked back to our house as fast as we could. We didn't even talk about it until we were inside with the doors locked. We didn't know what to do except go to the other neighbors. So we walked door to door, asking them about Gordon. Some of them were shocked when we told them what happened. Others weren't surprised at all. A few people told us Gordon was a drunk whose wife left him years ago. It didn't make us feel any better because we were living next to him now. We tried to avoid him after that. We didn't look at his house, we didn't go outside unless we had to. But how long could you avoid your next door neighbor? Every night felt tense, like he could be watching us or trespassing again. Then, one night, a brick was thrown through our downstairs window. It shattered glass all over the living room. We both jumped out of bed when we heard it. When I ran downstairs, the brick was lying on the floor. No note attached or anything, just a brick. We knew it was Gordon. There was no one else it could have been, but we had no proof. We filed a police report. The police came to talk to him, but he denied everything. He acted confused and told them he had nothing to do with it. The police couldn't do anything except document the incident. We talked about putting up cameras and staying to fight it out. But honestly, we were too scared, and this was mentally exhausting already. We both felt like something worse would happen if we stayed. Not even 2 months after moving in, we started packing again. We couldn't live next to someone who hated us and had already gone into our yard at night and then thrown a brick at our house. Before we left, we filed another report explaining everything. The police said they would keep an eye on the situation, but we didn't feel protected. We moved out of that house and out of that neighborhood as fast as we could. We left behind the home we thought would be our first chapter in life together. I still think if we stayed there, you'd have eventually heard of my fiancée and I on the news having been murdered by this man. I wish it wasn't illegal to dox people. Boy, would I love to drop his address in this story. All we can do now is move on and upward from here. This story happened a couple of years ago, around late 2021. My name is Noah, and me and my fiancée Gabby, who is now my wife, had moved into a new house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was a nice 2-story house, perfect for our future family. The neighbors seemed friendly and welcoming as well. Most notably, the neighbors that lived to the right of us seemed the friendliest. It was a couple in their late 30s, but I wasn't really sure. The husband's name was Daniel, and his wife was named Veronica. They were very friendly and seemed like sweet people. They even baked us a red velvet cake as a little welcoming gift. The cake was really good, and we couldn't thank them enough for it. The first couple of weeks were good in the new neighborhood. It was quiet and peaceful, until we started noticing strange things with our neighbors, Daniel and Veronica. One night, around 11 p.m., I heard shouting coming from outside. I looked out my bedroom window and realized it was coming from their house, like they were arguing. I couldn't see them because the angle of the houses blocked my view. Eventually, I saw Veronica storm out to her car and leave. After that, it was quiet again. I told Gabby about it, and we just chalked it up to them getting into an argument and Veronica leaving to cool off. I was kind of concerned because they seemed like such sweet people, not the type to have heated arguments. But every couple has disagreements. We didn't think too much of it. Later on that same week, Gabby and I were coming back home. When we got out of the car, we heard yelling coming from inside their house again. They had their main door open, but the storm door was closed, so we could hear them arguing clearly. Again, it wasn't our business, so we ignored it. Then one day, I noticed Veronica's car wasn't there for a few days, but I assumed maybe she was on vacation. Daniel was still there because his car stayed parked, and I would see him go out once in a while. But then it became a week, then 2 weeks, and Veronica's car was still gone. My wife noticed too and thought maybe they got divorced or something, which would make sense due to their constant arguing. But the way she left was so sudden. One day her car was there, the next it was gone. And Daniel was acting weird. Every time we saw him, he would try to avoid us. He wouldn't wave like neighbors usually do, and the rare times I talked to him, he would talk fast and try to end the conversation as soon as possible, like he was nervous. Something was definitely up with him. After 3 weeks of Veronica being gone, I decided to go over and ask Daniel how things were. My fiancé argued against it, saying it wasn't our business and to leave it alone. But curiosity got the best of me, and I knew she was curious too, so I rang his doorbell. I knew he was home because his car was there. It took him almost 3 minutes to answer, and when he did, he looked off. He was sweating like he just ran a marathon, and he had this weird forced smile like he was hiding something. I asked him about Veronica and why I haven't seen her or her car in a while. He hesitated and said, she just went to go stay with her mom for a while out of state because she's very sick and she's looking after her. I felt like that was a lie, but I didn't question it. I might have believed him if he wasn't acting so strange. I then asked why he was sweating so much, and he said he was doing workouts upstairs. He was speaking really fast, like he was rushed or nervous, but then something happened that made my heart drop. I heard a voice scream from somewhere inside the house. I wasn't exactly sure where, but I was almost positive it was a woman's voice yelling for help. I asked what that was, and Daniel quickly said, "Oh, I'm playing a movie upstairs and forgot to pause it." That made no sense since he had just said he was working out upstairs. I just said okay and told him I would catch him later. I went back home and told Gabby everything. She was just as concerned as me and told me to call the cops. I did, and I requested to stay anonymous, even though Daniel would probably know it was me. I told the dispatcher that I heard something in my neighbor's house and wanted them to do a welfare check. Eventually, an officer pulled up. About 10 minutes later, I heard sirens and saw 5 police cars and an ambulance. Me and Gabby rushed outside. Officers were everywhere. Daniel was being taken away in handcuffs while Veronica was being rushed to the ambulance on a stretcher. We later found out Daniel and Veronica had been in an abusive relationship and things had escalated badly. Daniel kept her locked in the basement for weeks. I didn't even know they had a basement. Down there, he would assault her, rape her, abuse her, and do horrible things. He even sold her car to make it look like she wasn't home. When I heard that scream while talking to him, it turned out he stabbed her 5 times because she had made noise when he told her to be quiet while he answered the door. That explained why he was acting so strange. Unfortunately, Veronica didn't survive and passed a couple hours later. As Daniel was being escorted into a police car, he said, "I know it was you who snitched on me, and you'll regret this." I wanted to laugh it off if the situation wasn't so messed up, knowing he would be behind bars for a long time. It's crazy how you never know who people truly are behind closed doors. Daniel seemed like a friendly, normal guy, and so did Veronica. They seemed like a great couple, but obviously they had serious issues hidden underneath. Fast forward a couple nights after the incident, I woke up in the middle of the night. It was dark, and I saw the silhouette of a person. As my eyes adjusted, I saw that it was Daniel. My heart dropped. He said, "I told you you would regret this." He was holding a knife. I tried talking him down, telling him to calm down and just talk, but he didn't respond. I pressed myself against the headboard. Then, out of nowhere, he lunged at me. I screamed, and then I woke up for real. I was breathing heavily, and Gabby was beside me. She asked what was wrong, and I said it was just a bad dream. She went back to sleep, but I couldn't. The fact that I dreamed about my neighbor who murdered his wife breaking into my house to kill me chills me to this day. Most dreams fade, but this one stayed vivid, and the words he said in the dream were the exact same ones he said while being taken away in cuffs. I never told my wife about this dream. I don't know why. I guess because she might think I'm crazy or it would just stress her out. Eventually, after we got married, we moved to another part of town. It's a nice, quiet neighborhood and a great house, but the whole event traumatized us. Knowing we lived next to a murderer still haunts us. My name is Devin, and this happened 2 years ago when I was 24 and living in a duplex in Queens, New York. It was a small, old house that looked divided right down the middle. I rented the left side, and some man rented the right side. I never met him. I never even saw him. The landlord said he kept to himself and worked nights, so it didn't concern me. My bedroom was on the second floor, and the wall of my bedroom was the same wall as the neighbor's bedroom. If I pressed my ear up to the wall, I could hear faint movements on the other side sometimes, but that's to be expected in New York City. The first week that I lived there, nothing strange happened. I worked long hours, came home tired, ate something simple, and went straight to bed. I was just happy to have my own place. And then one night, things began. I was lying in bed scrolling on my phone when I heard what sounded like a man talking, but it didn't sound like a normal man's voice. It was high-pitched, like someone trying to talk in a fake voice. It was faint, and it was being spoken from the other room, but the wall was so thin that it felt like the person was standing right next to me. I couldn't understand what he was saying. It was just this weird, high voice mumbling. I tried to ignore it. Maybe he was on the phone, or maybe he was watching something on TV. Eventually, the mumbling stopped and I fell asleep. A few nights later, though, the mumbling came back. But this time it was louder, and this time it was definitely a man talking. I pressed my ear lightly to the wall and listened. It didn't sound like he was on the phone. It sounded like he was talking to himself. I didn't know whether to laugh or be slightly creeped out. To block the noise out, I put the blanket over my head. I had work early the next morning and I needed sleep. I think that was the first night I realized I did not like living there alone. 2 weeks after that, the knocks started. I was lying in bed again, half asleep, when I heard 2 taps on the wall right next to my head. It was so close that I flinched like someone was touching me. I sat up and waited a few moments in silence, and then there were 2 more identical taps on the wall from the other side. I knew for sure that it was not a house settling noise that could just easily be explained away. I rolled away from the wall and sat there shaking. I kept waiting to hear something else, but it went quiet. I wanted to knock back, but I realized that acknowledging it would likely make it worse. The next morning, I told myself it was not a big deal and that I was overreacting. Over the next week, the knocks continued. Sometimes soft, sometimes harder, always at night, and always when I was trying to sleep. One night it went on for so long that I put in headphones and turned on a loud fan. I remember lying awake thinking about how thin the wall was, how close his room was, how close he was. He could literally be lying just 2 feet away from me. It scared me more every night. But still, the knocks could have just been him sitting against the wall and accidentally banging or tapping the wall with something. But then came the night that everything changed. I'll never forget it. I was lying in bed on my side, facing the wall. My eyes were closed, but I was not asleep yet. The room was dark, except for my street lamp shining through the blinds. I heard the knocks again. 3 slow ones. I kept my eyes closed and tried not to react. Then I heard that same high-pitched man's voice come through the wall. It was muffled, but not that muffled. I could hear each word clear enough. He said, "What are you doing in there?" My lungs locked up. I sat straight up in bed, shaking so hard I felt my teeth chattering. This was no longer just potential accidental taps on the wall. He was now acknowledging me directly. He said it straight through the wall. I could just tell he said it like he knew I was right next to him. I grabbed my phone and called my boyfriend. I whispered to him that I was scared out of my mind and told him exactly what happened. He told me he was coming over right away and he would stay the night with me. I stayed sitting up with the lights on until he arrived. The rest of the night, nothing happened. It was almost worse that way. It made me feel crazy, like the neighbor knew my boyfriend was there. For a few days, things were quiet. I started thinking maybe it was just some weird coincidence that the neighbor was doing something and I misheard. But then a few nights later, something happened that made me leave the house running. I still have bad dreams about it. I was asleep this time, fully asleep. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but I woke up fast. Something snapped me awake. I sat up slightly, and then it started. The knocks on the wall, like someone drumming their fingers right beside my head. I screamed back without thinking. I shouted for whoever it was to leave me alone. I was shaking and breathing hard. I think mustering up the courage to finally yell back spiked my adrenaline. I don't know exactly what I expected next, but I will tell you, what did happen next I never expected in a million years. There was a voice. It came from inside my room. A voice in the dark said, "Go to sleep." It was not the voice from the wall. It was deeper and closer, right there in my room. I launched off my bed screaming. For some reason, the brief moments of my running through the hallway and down the stairs was a blur, because I really just remember getting outside and running into the streets screaming for help over and over. I must have looked insane. I ran barefoot onto the sidewalk. I kept looking behind me, expecting someone to be chasing me. I didn't stop screaming until a man 2 houses down came outside and stared at me like he didn't know what to do. I begged him to let me use his phone to call my boyfriend, but he said by the sound of it I needed to call the police, so I called the police instead. I waited by that man's sidewalk shaking and crying until the police arrived. When they showed up, I told them everything that happened. They asked me if I was sure that someone was in the house, and I said yes, 100% yes. They drove me back to my duplex, and 2 officers went inside. My front door was still wide open like I left it. They said there were no signs of forced entry. They asked me if I remembered unlocking the door as I ran out. I had no memory of touching the lock. I told them I didn't think I unlocked it, but I was so panicked that maybe I did. I couldn't be sure. They checked every room, every closet, under the bed, everywhere. No one was in the house. They knocked on the neighbor's door too, but he wouldn't open up. It looked like he wasn't home at all. Eventually, my boyfriend showed up and took me back to his place. I was still shaking hours later. I don't remember sleeping again the rest of the night. In the morning, I called my landlord and told him everything. I told him I needed to know who the neighbor was and if he had any history of problems or strange behavior. I also told him I wanted to break the lease immediately. At first, he pushed back. He said he needed notice and paperwork. I told him I would not step foot in that duplex alone again, and he needed to help me. It took a whole day of phone calls before he said he would let me break the lease. My boyfriend came with me every single time I went back to the duplex to move my stuff. I refused to go alone. During those days, we tried knocking on the neighbor's door multiple times, but he never answered. It was like no one lived there. But there were signs that someone did, like packages at the door and a car in the driveway, but no human response. I ended up moving back in with my parents for a while until I found a new place. I still don't know if that neighbor was actually in my room that night, or if someone got in without the police noticing, or if it was just all in my head from the stress. But that one's the least likely explanation because it's pretty clear what's real and what's in your head. My landlord told me later that the neighboring tenant eventually moved out too without saying a word. I don't know what really happened in that duplex.